Aníbal.
Bueno, buenos
Well,
días
good morning
a todas y
to all of
todos.
you, ladies and
Quiero saludar
gentlemen. I'd
especialmente a
like
quienes
to
nos están
greet those who
acompañando.
are joining us
Ernesto
this
Otone,
morning, Ernesto
director general de
Otone, the
Cultura
General Director of
de la
Culture
UNESCO,
of UNESCO,
Rebeca Greenspan,
Rebecca
secretaria
Greenspan,
general
the General
iberoamericana,
Ibero-American Secretary,
Virginia Gote
Virginia Agote,
y Enrique Abogadro,
and
responsables
Enrique
de Cultura de la
Abogadro,
provincia de
responsible
San
for
Juan
culture of the
y de
San
la
Juan
Jefatura de
province
Gobierno de la Ciudad de
and
Buenos
of the
Aires,
cabinet of
Nada Yabut, una
chiefs of the
académica
city of Buenos Aires, Nada
especializada
Shabut,
en arte de Medio Oriente y
a specialist
especialmente
in
en
Middle
Irak,
East art. She
y
specializes in
Vino
Iraq art,
Sen,
and Ibino
decano de la
San,
Facultad de
the
Artes de
Dean
Tokio.
of the
Muchos de
Tokyo Art
ustedes han
School
sido
of
ya
Art.
participantes
Many of you have
importantes de una
been
manera o de
important
otra en todo el
participants
trabajo de la
in
primera
all
y segunda.
the first and second edition of BIENALSUR. With Ibino, we worked extensively in several projects, and we are presenting in UNESCO a project. We are submitting one. Turn is the name of the program, and that created and directs Ibino in the University of Arts in Tokyo. He will be a protagonist of BIENALSUR again through that project. Enrique Avogadro took very active participation in the previous editions of Bienal, and we always count on the support and the goodwill, the good participation of the Ibero-American General Secretariat. Why this meeting? As it happened surely to all of you, when the pandemic broke out, we wondered what to do with the projects that we were having in the pipeline. I'm sorry I didn't mention Carmen Vázquez Camacho, the Minister of Culture in Colombia. She also was an active collaborator in BIENALSUR in Colombia. So I'm sorry I missed your name, and I greet you very warmly and very specially. So I was saying, when the pandemic broke out, we all wondered what to do with the projects that we were having in the pipeline, which had to be set aside and which we had to go deeper into. That is, how to take action vis-a-vis the new situation. When we thought in terms of BIENALSUR, we wondered whether, amidst a healthcare problem, it was proper and fitting for us to keep moving forward with the project. And it took us no time to realize it was. We realized that BIENALSUR had to adapt to the new conditions the world was living through. And because of all our past efforts, because of all that what meant for us as a cultural expression of a very high level of commitment, it was necessary at a point where this pandemic, additionally to the health effects, it would have an effect of feeding or going deeper into the divides in the world from a social point of view and from the lack of respect on the various minorities, both in terms of gender and ethnic groups. We thought that not only we didn't have to stop on it, but on the contrary, it became more necessary than ever before to try and go deeper into the project. But those meetings that we called Global South, Sur Global, that we have over the last years conducted in 18 occasions, they were quite massive because of the high turnout of people that would take part, with participants from various countries around the world, as is happening today, but the conditions were not given for us to do so. So we considered this number of BIENALSUR meetings. Diana will explain how the first 3 happened, meaning what type of topics we discussed and which type of issues we believe have to be dealt with today, or we suggest that we should be treating or dealing with today. We thought that BIENALSUR had awoken some sort of expectation, and we increasingly received more considerations to be supported on our project, more requests on the part of several countries around the world who wanted to be part and parcel of this. And when the pandemic broke out, we had already developed the opening call out for artists to submit their projects and for curators to also submit their projects. And we really didn't know what would happen, whether we would receive projects from various parts of the world, whether people would be willing and open to share or submit their projects, or to think and create projects for that matter. I was about to say that we were struck by surprise, but actually it wasn't a surprise because those of us in BIENALSUR are a small group. We are fanatics, we are determined people. So we knew that this couldn't go wrong. And as I was saying, which we could have called a surprise, but it didn't take us by surprise. We received more than 5,500 projects from over 100 countries around the world. Speaking about that means that not only all European nations were included, many countries who had already taken part increased the number of projects that they were submitting, all Arab nations, including Palestine, and also at the same time, Israel submitted lots of projects. We received projects from Oceania, from Asia. You know, countries in prior editions may have sent one or two projects, but now their participation had gone multiple. We received projects from places where we were forced to study in detail so as to identify them, such as the meridional islands of the south of the United States, and from a number of remote places from a geographical perspective, or maybe because they are not that well known places. So all these ingredients, I mean, validity of thought, while we were trying to create a line of thought in BIENALSUR in the last few years, and the response, the reaction of people caused us to decide to summon all of those who had been participating so far in the BIENALSUR meetings to keep assisting, to keep helping us to think and discuss, and to be fully aware. And as we are fully aware that in moments that are such complicated for the world as these ones, thinking, elaborating, talking about our projects with a high level of social and human involvement is something entirely necessary. This is why we are here. This is why we are so confident of our project, BIENALSUR. This is why our expectations are high for the third edition that will get started between July and August in 2021. And we remain confident that the situation that we are living through today will improve, so that this edition will be made possible with as much openness, quality, and security as we are willing to provide. So again, welcome to you all, ladies and gentlemen, to take part in this meeting. And I'll give now the floor to Diana so she gives us the details of the logistics. Thank you all. I'd like to welcome those who are on the other side of the screen. By that, I mean those who are following the meetings. As Anibal was saying, we have been training from the very beginning. We have been training on how virtuous dialogue is in and of itself, on this type of connection that is built with others, the voices. We rethink the succession of presentations and whatnot. And for that reason, when we started with these meetings, we started with an initial session that was some sort of state of affairs, so to speak. And from that, lots of terms came about that contributed to this series in connection to the emergency and to our crisis, to think about this crisis and the inequalities and the frailties that are evidenced in the cultural global system, considering the nuances or the subtle differences by each and every one of us. On the second meeting, we focused much more on the way in which this condition, being in a lockdown, we are currently going through in different parts of the globe, of the planet, contribute to reshape the way we get to see the world. And on the third meeting, we focused on how this gets constructed. I mean, the narrative in this continuous present, and how this process of producing texts that will help us think about what we are leaving behind, what situation we are right now at. Many who predicted the future, well, you know, were not all that right. The first few cases happened in February, but there are new cases that keep on appearing. Enrique showed us a publication that was just released by the Ministry of Culture, where again, they update positions on this issue. So in the fourth meeting, the one we are at right now, we thought it would be interesting to have you join us this morning because you show the possibility not only to contribute your thoughts on this situation, but also to implement strategies for the present and strategies with a look into the future, possible exits, so to speak, or ways out to this. I will give, there is some sort of interference here. We apologize. It's my understanding that we found some sound, we heard some sound that didn't belong to us. So I'll go back to my train of thought. So I say we are interested in talking about questions that have to do with all the strategies that got implemented quickly, culture at home, that continues to be highly effective and highly useful, how to keep thinking about that and how to go about for culture not to remain at home or not to remain at the electronic devices, how to create this migration and all the things that we learned about how to develop culture at home or all these platforms, how to capitalize them on this continuity, on this continuum. There is something that came about in the last meeting and which is really very important as well, because this is part of the roar that we listen to in the culture world. Culture came out to help the mental health of people in a way, and culture keeps accompanying society in a way, but to a great extent, this happened in a gratuitous manner. So how to recombine this vocation that we are so willing to provide to keep being an active listener as culture, and how to, at the same time, generate resources so that this is not the pre-installed dynamics. I mean, culture need not be free or gratuitous. How the different positions you have from the ministries of culture and whatnot are assessing this to be the case, this situation. So I leave it here and I'll give the floor to Ernesto Otone, if he would be willing to get started. Well, I mean, if there's no other better alternative, I'll take the floor first. No, that's joke aside. It's my pleasure to greet you all from Paris. I'm in a privileged situation because, I mean, here we have for over 3 weeks now left the lockdown behind, and life goes back to normal slowly but surely. I mean, meetings recontinue. Of course, the present virtual world continues to exist. As was stated, the pandemic around COVID-19 is no doubt a challenge for what comes next at a societal level and at an economy level around the world, because this is a serious crisis around the continents in all regions. Now then, in the sector of culture, in all honesty, I should say that this is the first time in history where the value chain, the full value chain has been touched or I mean, it was shaken. Access to goods and services has been shook up. And this, of course, has an impact on the social and economic level of artists, and it affects entire communities that had their lives around cultural tourism. As soon as the crisis started in Europe, we started conducting statistical studies, and they showed that in those sites of World Heritage, 93% of those sites, they had closed, they had shut down their spaces entirely. That doesn't only mean the lack of visitors, it affected the entire ecosystem, tourism around those sites, and immaterial heritage, plus 94% of all sorts of celebrations around immaterial heritage got stopped altogether. And that means that UNESCO, of course, decided to say that we had to be quite careful with this crisis because it could affect very deeply not just the ways of living, but also the rights and accesses. So this is why we started seeing the figures of freedom of speech of artists, and in some countries, because of the laws that have to be imposed because of social distancing and healthcare, stopped basic things that had been achieved with a lot of effort and with a lot of struggle and with legislations on the country. One of the biggest landmarks where our Ministry of Colombia is present was on April the 2nd, when we had this marathon of plus 130 ministers of culture who were able to expose how they were being affected and especially what type of responses and solutions could be projected. We carried out a study on museums, and let me be clear on this. It hadn't been conducted since 2012. Museums had grown by 60% around the world. In less than 8 years, we have close to 13,000 new museums, many of them being local, many of them having to do with community identities, and of course, anthropology or contemporary art. And this means that there is this reality going on. The reality in museums got confronted to the fact that in Latin America, and I'll focus some on Latin America, 98% of all museums existing in the Caribbean and in Latin America had been closed, had shut down their operations. This showed that, in contrary to other parts of the world where investment in technology and virtual access, in Latin America, we were kind of lagging behind. In the Caribbean, less than 3% of museums had some sort of visiting power. So this means that when we go back to quote unquote normal, that audience will have to be regained. In Europe, they kept their audiences. They grew the numbers. Today, museums have greater audiences, 3 times more virtual audiences than they would have in the past, even though they opened up their doors. In our continent, this is not the case. And this means we need to revisit public policies and legislations to make this happen. And finally, so that I can share some dialogue with other participants, I'll just say that one of the most extraordinary things that I had to deal with in those last few days is that we were faced with having to create a program that's called Resiliart or Resil Art, resilient art. Colombia, Argentina, and Mexico were quite strong in Latin America, where we had more than 90 seminars and meetings, but from the civil society agencies, from actors, from creators, in order to carry forward those voices of those who are working, those who are suffering because they don't have the means necessary to make ends meet, so that this is listened to by the political authorities of our member states, so that they are incorporated in the responses and in the solutions. This has proven to be a very wonderful effort. I tried to monitor it through following up on public policies and different editions. This took place once every week, and this showed us what the biggest trends are at a public level, at a public policy level, at a national level and at a local level, at a city level as well. And I'm glad to find the city of Buenos Aires there, because it is quite clear that today the first thing that we are facing with how communities can respond to the pandemic are cities. I mean, cities are the stars, the protagonists of actions that are taken together with the national government. And the last point I'd like to talk, since we are celebrating this year the 50th anniversary of the convention of 1970, I had a meeting with Interpol and Customs of illegal trafficking. That's the convention. And during this period, illegal trafficking increased in an unprecedented proportion through the platforms and through the web, unluckily so. So we need to revisit policies around the use and access to technologies because we have these two problems. I mean, we open up a number of spaces where in the past it would be done more physically, but now we also have to take care of the fair payment to artists. And we have to admit to this. Platforms are not paying what they should be paying to their creators because they are the ones that contribute content. Come on. So these are my reflections. I give the floor to whomever will follow. Thank you so much for this invitation. And with UNESCO, we are behind anything that you may need so we can keep progressing and so we can leave the crisis behind. This crisis will be longer than was estimated. For the world of culture, it'll last not months, but years before we go back to, quote unquote, the normal things that we had achieved in the last few years. Thank you, Ernesto. I'm sorry, Diana, I stepped in. You can continue. I was about to give the floor to Rebecca, but not without expressing how concerned we are about the length of the crisis for the world of culture, as Ernesto was saying. But if we think that every crisis is an invitation to creativity, to ingenuity, maybe it's worth going through it. Rebecca. Thank you very much, Diana. I'd like to extend my greetings to all my colleagues, my warm greetings to Anibal and Diana from BIENALSUR. Thank you for having us on board, and to all those that are joining, to the Minister of Colombia, my dear Carmen. I'm delighted to see you again. And I remember all the things we've done at the Ibero-American level, to Ibino, to Enrique, to Virginia, to Nada. Um, a virtual warm hug that I extend to each and every one of you. Even though we cannot hug each other in person, I hope that those moments will be back soon and available for all of us. I'd like to get started at the point Ernesto left and try to say that I'm not an expert in culture. I'm a user, a simple user. Of course, the Ibero-American space, the backbone, the vital backbone is the cultural space. But I'd like to sort of give you this brush strokes of what is going on in the region, in the Latin American region, because I agree with Ernesto that we haven't left the crisis behind. We haven't come out of it, and the crisis leads to other crises that will happen, such as the social and the economic crisis that we'll have to live through and endure for quite some time. And this interacts with our structural weaknesses. I believe this does so in the Latin American region or in the Ibero-American region, but it also happens in the rest of the world. In the beginning, many said that this crisis would make us equal. I apologize to disagree. It doesn't make us equal. We can all get sick, but we cannot get cured in the same manner, unfortunately so. And when I talk about curing, I'm referring to healing, the broader sense of the term. Our concern is that this crisis may deepen the divide, the inequalities that we already had in many parts of the world, and undoubtedly so in our region. And I believe that that is the place where we should start saying that, unfortunately so. I heard Anibal say that the Argentine government, the city government and the national government have taken measures very quickly and very well taken. And I was listening to Virginia talk about San Juan, where the pandemic is hitting people really hard. But I should say that in the rest of the region, this is not the case. I should say that as we speak, a very sad piece of information is that out of 2 new dead people in the world, one of them is a Latin American citizen. And that is a figure that is quite staggering. It is sad and it concerns us. I mean, it's concerning for our region, and numbers in social and economic terms are not better at all. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has just put out their data on growth or regrowth in the world, and Latin America will be the second um, region in the world that will be hit the hardest, following Europe. We are talking about a drop in our GDP, an unprecedented drop. I believe that in the last few weeks, we we were saying that this was the strongest crisis following the Great Depression, but I have just heard the general manager of the IMF who said that this is the toughest crisis ever recorded in humankind. Latin America is expecting a 9% drop in their GDP. This is unprecedented. We've never seen it in our lifetimes. And the question hence is, how are we going to go about protecting the most vulnerable people? How are we going to uh, protect the social mesh, the social fabric? How are we go about protecting the creative industries and the cultural sector and whatever it entails, informal unregistered workers, small and medium-sized companies in our region, and the world of culture plays a role here. And maybe here, Diana, what we should say first is to express our recognition to artists and to cultural agents based on what you were saying, because of a generous behavior with so much solidarity. I really don't know how else we could have gone through this lockdown at the hardest points, at the toughest points of isolation, without the generosity of the cultural sector. I mean, in the terms that you were mentioning, Diana, in mental health, the individual family environment, of course, social cohesion, understanding, getting to grasp the crisis from their perspective. Diana, you were talking about building a narrative in a continuous present. That's your expression, and I follow it to the T. And as Anibal was saying, at tough moments, cultural projects with a high social value and with a high human value have proven to be fundamental for all of us, individually speaking, family-wise and socially-wise. And I now believe that it's for society to return that generosity, because the cultural sector will require great support on the part of public policies, and it'll require great support on the part of society, so that the sector, the cultural sector, and the agenda of the cultural sector should be at the limelight of their concern, at the core of their concern, because it's a sector that could otherwise fall into oblivion. Economic authorities might as well forget of it, but it is our duty to make it visible, to render how important the sector is, and not just how important it is, but how much of a contribution the sector makes to society and to economy. And I believe that part of those who are here should undertake this responsibility as our own responsibility. The second comment I'd like to make here is the following. We are at several processes. Ernesto mentioned part of it. We are together with UNESCO and OAS and the General Secretariat, and under the leadership of Argentina, to whom I thank, because the Ministry of Culture of Argentina, in the context of Cultural Mercosur, has been a true leader in this. We are promoting a study on the impact of culture, a study that has to do with the qualitative and quantitative impact on the region. We are doing this, as I said, together with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank. It's important for development banks to buy into the actions that are targeted at the cultural sector. And as I said, with UNESCO, Ernesto has proven to be a great partner, and with the Organization of Ibero-American States. And I think we should appreciate, be more appreciative of how the Ibero-American space, the cultural Ibero-American space, is made available to the households and to institutions. The cultural heritage is made available to people in artistic manifestations, in cultural expressions, in all conceivable ways. And this has been so, even more so during the times of crisis. We will have in November, or well, I really don't know whether it'll happen in November, but we have a summit of presidents. That's what I mean to say. It's the Ibero-American Summit of heads of state, of government authorities, and it'll be important on our side to contribute our knowledge so that they will get to see what happened to the cultural sector, what the impact is, and what proposals are that have come out of this discussion among all the stakeholders in the space of culture, not just the governmental sector, but also creators and citizens, the society as a whole, and undoubtedly what the proposals are when they come out with a forward view by looking forward. Undoubtedly so, we will have to make a paramount effort. What has been made available by countries is really important. We will listen to those who are in charge, both local and national, of what the policies are. But I'm sure of one thing. I know that many instruments have been made available, credit instruments and collateral instruments. But what about the cultural sector? You know, the additional uh, debt we may carry doesn't solve all the problems that we are suffering. The cultural sector will need support in order to get transformed in this era going digital, just like many other sectors, such as many other undertakings, and such as many other industries. I'm not just talking about creative industries, but I'm talking also about innovative industries. We will have to help them with more than mere credits. So this is why it is so important to listen to what subject matter experts will have to say on the matter. I mean, governmental authorities. Numbers are quite hard. I'm talking about the impact. And as I have said, I'll repeat myself, the impact is not yet over. We have gathered, we have met with many stakeholders at different levels of government, many players in the Ibero-American programs. We've made great efforts, wonderful, hopeful efforts. And I should say that we need hope in order to come out of this crisis and in order for us to set ourselves in motion in favor of these solutions. And I'd like to conclude, Diana, by saying that I honestly believe that this is the beginning, the true beginning of the 21st century. Centuries don't begin chronologically. I mean, the 20th century began with the First World War in 1914, and I believe that the 21st century is beginning right now, and that the trends we were seeing coming down the way took a qualitative leap forward and will have to adjust at a speed we were not ready for. The president of Telefonica here in Spain said last time that in the last 3 months, they had had a demand for digital services, the one that they were expecting to have in the next 5 years. In only 3 months, they had the demand that was worth of 5 years. And the question is, how ready are we to take this quantum leap forward? It's a dialectic quantum leap forward, and we have to help the cultural sector, not just to survive, but to take this leap forward. And as Ernesto said, not everyone fared the same way in this world. Many platforms became rich. I mean, Netflix shares have grown by 50% in the last few days, but not everyone has gone the same way. How are we going to make it so that there's recognition of added value in the broader added value networks? And how about the added value of our creators without there being greater concentration? in the cultural sector. This will be a task that we'll all have to undertake, and it will require the coordinated and joint effort and of all of us, and with lot more cooperation than competition if we are to move forward. The key word, the buzzword is here, cooperation, coordination, in a joint effort. Uh, in a joint manner, we'll be able to leave it behind. And in all honesty, we all hope that this will happen. And culture does play a very important role in the task at hand. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rebecca, very much. Anibal, I thought you were kind of hinting. Otherwise, we'll give the floor to Carmen. No, let's give the floor to Carmen so we keep going. And I'll then make some comments because you noticed I was jotting down notes, but I was listening to attentively. Thank you. A very special greeting to all of you. Anibal, thank you so much for inviting me to share at these times of difficulty, to talk about something we are so passionate about, culture, the importance of culture in societies. Ernesto, Diana, Rebecca, Enrique. I hope I don't forget to mention any one of those here, to all panelists, and of course my follower, those who are following me. I was listening to Ernesto and to Rebecca. I do want to get started by saying that I do see the future with high optimism in spite of all difficulties. I want to see it with rosy lenses. What happened for culture after the crisis, after the pandemic, is good. I think it is good. Why? Because in these 3 months of crisis, societies have confirmed, they have ratified what culture means for them, for themselves. I mean, what culture can do for them, what culture, art, and heritage does for them in the life of people. These 3 months, Colombian artists submitted to Colombian households their time. I mean, they followed up, they were present with their music, with their poetry, with their art, museums at homes, theaters at home, platforms for the youth, uh, to get them closer to culture and to national identity. And that showed, as Rebecca was saying, and maybe Ernesto also hinted to that. Yes, of course, artists are working gratuitously. They are delivering all their talent and creativity to the disposal of society so that mental health is under check. It's not easy to be at a lockdown. It's not easy to be isolated, especially we Latin Americans who are so fond of hugs and of being close to people. This has been really complicated for us, but artists were there uh, right by side by side to us, showing that culture continues to be alive. And when I see that, I see the future with rosy eyes, is because that what happened during the crisis, the attention paid by the government during the crisis to accompany the culture and artistic sectors, and I speak on behalf of Colombia, of course, is that pandemic caught us ill-prepared, of course. We were unprepared. We didn't know how to face it, but we, step by step, kind of understood how we can do this homework. And this was thanks to an articulation between the national, regional, and local governments, listening to artists, understanding what was going on in each and every one of the sectors in the country. You all know how multicultural our culture is, where each of the corners of the country has different cultures. It is diverse, but it is as rich and as important. And of course, it brings our country together, and it's a tool of social transformation and of development. I apologize for that. When you think about what has been meant for the cultural world, for artists to see that they cannot show their art or express through culture and art in the traditional way, I should say that I'm deeply saddened when I have to think about how they, as artists, feel that they are hand-tied. They cannot show their culture or their art. But also when I see that brick and mortar museums are closed and that theaters are closed, those museums having our heritage, our memory, it is really very strong and it is tough. We are blown as a society by this. So what comes next for culture, departing on the basis of the need people have for culture, will be very positive. It'll be really very positive. In any crisis, well, governments get together to deliver responses or answers to those artists. They have to do with legislative and administrative measures. And well, both Ernesto and Rebecca were mentioning this. It will liven up or lighten tax burdens, credits, countervailing duties or offset rates, financial support to our to our artists who are not having an income because of the crisis. And in the middle of this crisis, we need to think about reopening our doors. And then we think how we can help so that the reopening will not be that traumatic, not for the cultural intermediaries or for the rest of the society that are quite hungry to be able to go and take active roles in cultural spaces. The thing is that our activities have to do with audiences, with crowds. So we had to think about strict biosafety and biosecurity measures, strict protocols so that our museums, libraries would open up their doors slowly but surely with the biosafety and biosecurity measures in place. So the next problem comes along. How about our museums? They work with very tight resources. So how will they reopen their doors and secure a lower risk to those who will decide to go to cultural spaces? So our government has to think about a political support so that they bestow museums with resources in order to make available protocols that can be implemented to ensure that people will be confident when visiting cultural spaces so that they don't feel themselves at risk. I believe that hand in hand with this reopening, we have to think about reactivation as well. So these are three moments where the view, the outlook of the national government vis-a-vis the situation of artists will have to somehow be articulated, paying attention to the crisis, reopening and reactivation. And this is where we are focused. We are currently having a reopening with security measures in place, with protocols in place. We are sending out messages to people. We have to keep taking care of the life and health of Colombians, but hand in hand with reopening the country, the economy of the country, and this reopening, we have to make culture present as a cornerstone of our reopening. At the National Plan for Development, culture was always at the limelight, at the core, and one of the questions that you asked was, where are we going to place culture in the post-pandemic phase? We borrow what we brought so far. Culture was at the core of public policies, at the core of the government agenda, as has been determined in the National Development Plan, thinking about protection of culture, but also securing tools for economic development through artistic and cultural industries. So what we did, I mean, in the phase where we reopened our sector, was to secure that culture would continue alive, providing resources so that we would make it easier to reopen those spaces. But at the same time, we thought about how to promote culture and place it at the core so that it is an important part of this reopening. I repeat myself, I see the future with optimism for culture because I don't see any economic reactivation in any country that won't necessarily have to do with culture. Culture will have to necessarily be present in the economic reactivation. And that is where we need to lay emphasis. I should say what we are thinking about along those lines. First, if we take a look at what happened with culture in the last 3 months, we are reaffirming how important it is. Additionally to that, culture has been speaking to us about what is happening in the moments of crisis. It is kind of helping us think about the future with hope and with optimism. In our country, we have summoning that is called Let's Share Who We Are, recognizing the diversity in our culture, populationally speaking and considering the minorities and vulnerable people. Let's share who we are, art, culture, and heritage. A hug of hope at a national level, because we want people to tell how they are living through this crisis, how they are experiencing it, and additionally to that, how they regard culture and how they regard our country in the future with hope, through music, through dance, through narratives, storytelling, poetry, songs, lyrics, so that this will help us see the future with high hopes. And this will help us understand far more deeply what is happening in our territories so that we can get projected to the future with optimism and with hope. It'll be far easier for us to understand what happened in the last 3 months if the players themselves, that is the community in and of itself, is the one who tells us how they lived through it and what they expect of the future. So I believe it's a combination of actions, government actions, both national and department-wise or local-wise, and also the entire interaction and a combination of this with the civil society players in understanding the messages that are being sent amidst this crisis, to then be able to build other public policies that will get adapted to the new normal and to the new realities that we'll have to face up to in our provinces and in the entire world, in our countries and in the entire world. And in concluding, I should highlight the following. What happened with the world, the virtual world? It continues to concern us. I mean, the level of connectivity in our countries. We have to make this big effort. As a matter of fact, we already got started with a new look into technology so that we can secure that, as a matter of fact, access to technology or access to connectivity will be made available to all territories in our country. That's a major change in connection to what is going on. I mean, in-person gatherings will always be a key point or part for culture and art, but virtuality has come to remain. We have made a living on it for the last 3 months and we enjoyed it, and we'll have to make an effort to secure its continuity, especially among those who are more vulnerable. It arrived to stay, maybe, to say that this secures access to culture and art through virtuality. And I believe that we have to make a big effort. I mean, governments have to make a big effort so that this happens, so that this complements whatever can be done in culture, to complement what can be done in culture in a presential manner. Virtuality will always be there. I'm quite optimistic of what will happen with culture, because in Latin America, we have countries that are quite diverse. They recognize and appreciate the importance of cultural diversity. In my country, as I was saying, we have an agreement to protect and promote culture. And there is this promotion to cultural and creative industries that are at the forefront of culture, art, and preservation of heritage. And they help the value chain in culture and in art to remain at the forefront and help for sustainable development of our country and culture. So I will close here. And of course, I will keep interested in conversing with you. Thank you, Carmen. And going back to Rebecca's metaphor, culture as the backbone of Spanish-speaking America, well, I suggest Enrique to take the floor. Thank you so much, Diana and Anibal. It's my pleasure to be part of this cycle. It's my pleasure to be able to share it with so many friends of culture from all the region here. I was listening quite attentively. I'll try not to repeat on the topics that have already been discussed. Nonetheless, I share concerns on the status of affairs of culture in general as a result of the pandemic. I would split this into two. On the one hand, the absolute need to think about culture as a tool for thought, to think our future. Diana was mentioning a book that we just published. It's called Porvenir, or What is Coming Next, The Culture in Post-Pandemic. It is available free of charge on the web, and it has a cycle of dialogue with authors on the YouTube channel of the Culture Ministry in the city. And we wanted to have this space of reflection of what is coming next. What's interesting in the text is that the majority of them, far from putting forward a very certain future, it just steps on the doubt. And stepping on the doubt is not just a need, but a responsibility that we have in connection to how culture can help think about this future, which is of course uncertain, but at the same time, as we get to think about it, we will be able to be true protagonists. On the other hand, challenges of cultural leadership are challenges of action. And as I was saying, recognizing the status of affair of the cultural sector, not just in Argentina, but in the entire world, and especially in the region, it has a common characteristic, the high level of informality of unregistered workers, people who work in culture. I'm not just talking about artists, but workers in culture in general. They depend on making ends meet, stepping on the stage, having workshops and courses, working in order to then sell in visual arts.
Con, en general, ninguna o poca contención.
There is very little help. There is very little social help as compared to other workers. This is what we are seeing in other moments. Cultural spaces, in the case of the city of Buenos Aires, we have more than 500 independent cultural spaces. We are talking about music, theaters, independent galleries. They are key for cultural diversity, so we can have a more diverse culture. And they are fundamental for access to culture because we live, luckily so, in a city where 2 or 3 blocks from home, we will find the possibility of being protagonists of culture, thanks to the fact that there are people who are willing to open up this type of spaces. Of course, they are not willing to become rich. That's not what they are pursuing. And it's important for the state to accompany those people in this culture that is highly diverse, but is also very frail, very precarious. What we've done on our side is not just to secure the subsidies that are distributed by the Ministry of Culture of the City of Buenos Aires through the various lines of credit. We've increased by 50% these grants with an emergency fund in order to accompany theater places, milongas, where tango is danced, so characteristic of Buenos Aires city, trainers of artists and artists through a number of tools. The same has been implemented by the national government through the National Ministry of Culture through a number of tools by trying to accompany the sector. And I say trying because we cannot support the sector entirely on our effort because the depth of the crisis is far broader than the lines of subsidies that we are managing to distribute, but we cannot fully grasp the full solution to the problem. We've been working together with the sectors. I should say that Argentina is at a stage of lockdown, a very intense lockdown, at least so in the city of Buenos Aires and Greater Buenos Aires. There are other places in the country, as San Juan, who are at a different phase because they have no circulation of the virus. But since we are in this situation, what we try to do with each sector is to work in the partial return of culture in the context of pandemic. And an important reference here, in Argentina, we have this idea that culture is the first to shut down and the last to open. I think this is an error of concept. Culture, and I say so very forcefully so, culture is far no more dangerous than any other sector. We can exercise our role in a responsible manner. Of course, a massive meeting doesn't compare to going to a library where few people will be just reading books, but we are discussing this. We understand that culture has to be treated with the same rigor than any other sector. That is what we are doing in town. We have started, well, libraries will have until Wednesday, because now the president, together with the governor and the city mayor, have implemented a strict quarantine until July the 17th to put the virus on final chain. Um, but people can go to libraries, they can go buy books, musical activities, musicians, singers can perform without audience via streaming to generate income. We are working on the same lines for theaters and for other sectors of culture. And again, we think that culture has not any extra risk than any other sector. Of course, we have to secure, and this is done under very strict protocols, we have to secure the healthcare, not just of public in the future, but of course, of those who work in culture, I mean, artists and workers of culture. But I'd like to lay emphasis on this because I believe it is relevant. We have to think about culture as an essential good. We have to have food for our body and food for our spirit. Culture is food for our spirit, not just for those who develop the activity, but also for those who can get related to culture in its various manifestations. As soon as the pandemic started, Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, our city mayor, launched the Buenos Aires Culture at Home platform. Since the lockdown started, we got visited by more than 6 million people with enormous free cultural content. We renew our programming, offer virtual visits in museums, a section for the youngest. There is a section for children. There is a section where women and men can learn artistic disciplines at home. And we do so together with the sector in and of itself, in collaboration with provinces and cities from all over the country. San Juan is just an example. They were kind enough to give us content, but also with other countries, such as is the case with Mexico, the city of Mexico, or with the city of Montevideo in Uruguay, or Bogota in Colombia, and with other countries. Cultura en casa, culture at home, shows that people look for the possibility to keep connected and be protagonists, even when they stay at home. So in order to conclude, we should think about our task ahead. Culture needs to be a central tool in our conversation to reconstruct society. And why do I say reconstructing or rebuilding? Regretfully so, this virus has affected us a lot. Economically speaking, we are proud of the results that we are achieving in the country in healthcare terms, but we cannot be ignorant of the enormous economic impact. That's unavoidable. Priority is on healthcare, but the country will see their poverty indicators and their indicators of inequality very deeply harmed. So culture should be a tool for social reconstruction. This will have to do with changes that we are envisioning, a culture where we will be contributing to that construction of social networks. In Argentina, we have examples in our recent past. In 1983, with the return of democracy after the military dictatorship, culture was very present in reconstructing those links. Recently, so in 2001, after a phenomenal economic crisis, culture somehow, in its counter-cyclical capacity, developed activities even at the warmth of popular gatherings by keeping people together, by bonding people, and by setting people in motion. This is why it is essential for us to have these spaces of reflection, as is the case of BIENALSUR, because it helps us get started to think about what will come next. So we will be true protagonists. In the city, we think about how the public space can be a central piece to social reconstruction, a public space where we build citizenship, where we all have the chance to be protagonists. We also have this challenge that is not just cultural activities, but the manifestation of cultural and creative industries, as Ernesto was mentioning a while ago, will be able to take an equal role in access to technology, platforms, and distributions. All these are phenomena that we are seeing and that they generate opportunities. In a meeting I was having with Magdalena from IFA, according to their data, people in their country choose to consume local content. Of course, we all are users of international platforms as well, but there is a trend to favor local content. And there is something interesting in how we get connected to our identity. Our region, without a doubt, is rich, has a wealth of identitary terms. How this capacity to generate content that will speak to us can translate itself in cultural and creative industries that will generate highly added value employment that will contribute to our sectors. And in a paradoxical manner, this pandemic, this crisis, has exposed us to the need to transcend our borders. There is an enormous amount of trainers or teachers in the city of Buenos Aires. Their courses were presential and they are now on the web. And today they have students from all Spanish-speaking America. They choose to learn from a teacher from Buenos Aires because of any kind of characteristic they choose to go this way. And the same might be happening in all the cities. That, no doubt, is an opportunity we have to go deeper into. In concluding, I'd like to quote the following. In a previous meeting, Alejandro Grimson said, "Without any ideas, we cannot build any future." I'm absolutely in agreement with that. It is our responsibility not just to take part of meetings like this, but also to promote more spaces like this where we'll be able to imagine such a future and to make it a reality. Thank you very much for allowing me this space, and I remain available to share with our colleagues these experiences that we have been gathering so far, learning by doing, so to speak, while we experienced our pandemic. Thank you, Enrique. Virginia, how do you see from your perspective, from your Andean location and your safe location, this situation right now? Hello to all of you. I'd like to say hello to all of you. Thank you, Anibal and Diana, for your invitation. As you were saying, San Juan is in a very different situation from the city of Buenos Aires or the major cities of the country. But of course, we haven't remained alien to the situation. Right from the beginning, we were in an absolute lockdown because the province followed the national measures. And at the time, no one was really sure what would happen. And we were expecting the worst locally. But as time went by, luckily so, what is typically something that is negative for remote places because we are considered to be some sort of island. Well, the virus didn't reach us that bad. We always had imported cases. Never was there any local circulation of virus. We still are at a situation of risk, but it was kind of odd to live through this situation of absolute lockdown and world panic without having had any case. We had a month ago the first case in San Juan, but even when that was so, we lived through it as the tragedy was hitting us firsthand. Slowly but surely things more flexible. We always worked together, as Anibal was saying, governments together, provinces together with the national government, and of course agreeing on healthcare policies and general prevention policies. And surely, slowly but surely, we flexibilized on things. Of course, economic development is important. Culture, public culture is state-run. That was not at risk. Independent spaces were at risk, of course, and players in culture were at risk. They were suffering a lot, as was expressed by all the speakers who spoke before me. We can all agree on the fact that artists showed how generous they are, and they were in every part of the world, around the world, offering their productions, offering their creativity to join. And they have also shown how frail they are as a sector. We cannot be alien to that, to how much of informality is there in the sector. And opening up in a free manner was so important. People continue to receive it as normal. They don't even reflect on the fact that they should be paying to have access to those performances, to those services. Same thing happened to us. Those of us in decision-making roles, well, we were caught in fraganti, I mean, by surprise. We had been planning for the next 4 years, and all of a sudden everything was challenged. Nothing was like it was ever before, and nothing that we had thought before March can be substantiated into the future. And even though it is fundamental to rethink, we have to consider uncertainty. This is a doubt, which is a wealth of a doubt, but it's essential to exchange opinions, be exposed to other realities. And at the same time, we were forced to taking specific action. We had to take action right at the moment because everything was uncertain initially. So, and on the one hand, we need to be next to people for constructive purposes without being invasive, but also being present and being close to artists as well, to the field of culture, which is our field, and it is the field where we work very in close cooperation with. And that was our immediate concern, how to provide an answer, how to be close to them, and how to provide immediate solutions. We were able to implement, as Enrique said, the national government developed a number of programs with enormous communication. Provinces were able to take advantage of it. And in San Juan, we have very specific actions and policies, and necessarily so because of this informality and because of these contradictions in the administrative public system, we managed to, in the framework of emergency, work interministerially with social development and with other areas to have a more effective reach out onto the different agents of culture. We can talk about craft workers who are at Valle Fértil with no connectivity in a remote place, down to artists, independent spaces in the capital city of San Juan, or those who perform on squares during weekends. These are quite dissimilar situations, and they warranted different solutions. We summoned people. One was very welcome because it not just talked about the possibility of developing virtual projects, but also because it would help us develop projects moving forward. And in the future, when this is gone, we will be able to perform these activities. Our proposals reached a lot of people. And as the situation became more flexible, we were able to open up spaces with protocols in place and with healthcare responsibility, of course, but we were able to apply a few spaces in order to reactivate the sector. And a big stake on the part of the provincial government. 10 days ago, we had this social agreement that has been called Acuerdo San Juan. We had this working table where we worked with different sectors. We worked from the different areas. We had a first meeting Here we can have presential meetings, of course, with limited numbers of participants. So we were able to get together with representatives. I'm in charge of coordinating the table of culture. And I mean, beyond the concern, there's this big need to participate, to be part of this moment, which I believe is an enormous possibility so that we can reconstruct culture, so that we can do it all together. It is something that will involve all parties, and it would be really good if we would make the most of this opportunity, because we would be started from a scratch. That's quite encouraging. We are having commissions with all sectors so that we can listen to all voices, to all sectors. Every sector has its own differences. Not everyone has the same level of formality or situation, but no doubt, and this is not just for each of the sectors, but it's a matter of putting them on a table. We had representatives from all sectors, having people from the theaters, jugglers, performers, musicians, singers, all representatives of culture on the same panel. And of course, many of them would work limiting to themselves, but they opened up to this new foundation of culture. And this is really very good. We've been working for the last 2 months, and we've had 3 weekly meetings so that we can rewrite history. We have new development policies, and of course, this will be really very, very good. San Juan has been characterized by an enormous resiliency. We've always been so. We had a terrible earthquake in 1934. Our city was devastated. We had to get started from zero. Even though this is not comparable to what we lived back then, it is similar in some aspects because we are taking home of this opportunity to get restarted. And as is the case, of course, this situation has brought about a lot of social inequality. And in culture, this is no different. This happens in San Juan. What happens in the city doesn't compare to what happens in remote villages and towns. And we are working a lot with a number of diverse people. Um, we are working with the municipalities and with the leadership of territorial administration. And they are not representatives, they are mediators in a way. People who are social players in every community that will help us have access to places where there's no virtuality, and sometimes not even the programs that we discuss centrally doesn't trickle down on them, unfortunately. So I agree with Enrique on the fact that uh, culture should not be the last area to open up. But of course, we will be highly modified by this situation, and we need to get modified. In our old days, massiveness, crowds of people represented success. We aimed at more audiences and more public, not just for economic, but also because of the number of people that was a synonym with the number of success. But this forces us to think. We need to go down to a more human scale, a more personal world, a more intimate world, you know, presence in neighborhoods or in smaller communities, listening to others. Sometimes you cannot give them any response because, I mean, this authority type of approach where you talk to people or talk at them rather than talking with them. What about getting back to messages, being active on the phone? The human link, the bond has become more important than ever before. And of course, recovering identity and seeing how we can make use of our own culture rather than international culture has been quite calling in San Juan. Quite remarkable. As Carmen was saying, I'm optimistic here. I hope we are quite optimistic in this table. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here thinking about possible future. I mean, optimistic people outnumber the pessimists, and that's quite a fortune. And it is essential to do it all together. And if we are to walk down those lines, the social agreement, the social pact is essential so we can build. There's lots of programs to come to people, to come close to people, and it has to do with macro policies that we are developing. No one really knows what will happen, not from San Juan and our freedoms, so to speak, but we, of course, are no alien to what is happening, and we live the situation with the same sadness that the rest of the world is living. This is part of globalization. We feel firsthand what people in China or in Europe feel, because we do have acquaintances, we have relatives who live there, and the world is one. I appreciate this opportunity to share with you my thoughts. I believe we have the privilege of being not on a clean slate, because that's not the case. We have inherited lots of crises, and we have inherited lots of wealth or richness. But I didn't think that I had to live through in my life such a situation as the one we are living through today. And I see it as an opportunity. Thank you, Virginia. And from the place of the optimists, where I'm always having a place myself as well, I say, this resonated in me. Culture is the first to close and the last to open. And actually, on the webpage of UNTREF, the museums, we chose to say, we are virtually open. We remain virtually open rather than saying momentarily shut down, because all what we are doing, cultural programs at home, are open culture. It's more than open, it's overexposed in a way. So to the extent that we start thinking about our existence in this way, we'll gain terrain, or will reconfirm the terrain we have been built for us. Underpinned on this format, underpinned by this modality. It's just a comment, a dialogue that goes parallel to what you were saying. Well, of course, spaces have shut down, but activities haven't shut down, nor the spirit or the content for that matter. So maybe from that perspective, we'll keep opening up to the world. I wanted to now give the floor to Katsuhito Hibino, who from a world quite different and distant will give us his version on these scenarios. Yes. Good evening to all of you. It's my pleasure to be here with you. Your opinions so far have been remarkably interesting to me. I'm right now in Japan. This is the time in Japan. Mind you, it's 1:21 a.m. That's why I said good evening. Well, the majority of my co-citizens are sleeping right now, I should say. Well, going to sleep is really important, of course. When you sleep, you wake up to a new world. You cannot wake up to a new world if you don't go to bed at night. That's how it is. Half of the world is having daytime and half of the world is having nighttime right now. Some are in bed sleeping, others are fully buzzing in activity. And this is change in constant motion. But right now, the global condition, the world condition, is that many people are at home. They are not in normal activities, so to speak, no matter whether it is day or night. In my life, I am also living through a situation that has been unprecedented. It never happened to me. I mean, the fact that everyone is at home right now makes us think about it, doesn't it? And together with that, everyone is experiencing a new way to seize the day, so to speak. And that is really very important for me. It is quite remarkable, I should say. And what we refer to as culture today, when has it actually started? When was it born, what we call culture today? I started thinking about it. And if we don't think about that, it is quite difficult to think about a future culture. Isn't it so? So I started thinking about at what point did our culture get started? And to me, based on my own way of thinking about things, we now have what we call art, and it has to do with painting, and it has to do with an image that crossed my mind. I mean, at what point did human beings start painting? Maybe there's one who started the whole thing in culture, the first person to make a painting. Well, based on what I know, the first few paintings are in the caves, you know, the rupestric kind of art in caves, in the Altamira caves. So human beings were working externally, they were hunting animals, they were picking fruits, they were putting their lives at jeopardy, in danger.
から逃げて、で、洞窟の中に入っていく。
And at the same time, they were escaping from many places, from many hazards out there. So they would hide inside the cave. And that was how, when being inside a cave, much as we are locked down right now, they imagined the outer world and they represented it in those places. That was almost 20,000 years ago. So culture of painting has not changed much ever since. It continued developing in a continuum. And this culture of thinking about the outer world and representing it in a painting has been kept a tradition. And in this pandemic, the entire world situation became a cave. We all are kept in our own caves, our houses. And the global situation, what about the culture that is coming next? Whether Tokyo, whether Buenos Aires, whether Paris, or whether in any other city around the world, the fact of being outside of the cave, meaning interacting with other people, is not something that is allowed today. It has become quite a challenge this day and age. So in order to give birth, to rebirth a new culture, we have to go back to the basics, meaning go back 20,000 years ago, reconnecting to the primal origin. And economy, same thing. In our way of understanding things right now, the culture is the result of economy, meaning culture is moved by economy. And of course, economy now is hitting rock bottom. So it is necessary to reborn economy, to make economy reborn. It's not that economy moves culture, but actually culture should produce a different type of economy. It should promote a different type of economy. And based on this way of thinking, we who belong to the world of culture can think about that, and we have to set ourselves in motion. This is what I think about the whole thing. Culture is a social affair as well. In my own case, I am a participant of BIENALSUR, and I take part of a project that I lead. It's called Turn.
紹介してくれましたけれども、いろいろな地域、
Diana has already been talking about how in several places, in several cultures, people get together, indigenous people and minority communities, how they get together, how they get connected, how they become visible through cultural projects, how culture makes a good service for them. That is where artists play a role. They leave darkness to become visible. But while in darkness, some different culture can be created. And based on the culture that gets born from those darkness, we need to we managed to make a new thought visible. And this is the space where the thought of those minority artists can get us connected, and where we generate a common space around the world. And this is why the term turn has been assigned to my project. It's to make it turn, to make it go moving around. And that is the role of culture as I see right here, right now. And the big social problem that we are having right now.
芸術とか文化が生まれてくる。
I truly think that it shows us a space so that a new culture can be reborn.
これまでいろんな争い事というのは、
And that is where we will see how strong culture proves to be.
民族と民族という戦いであったり、
This is where we see how countries confront with one another, how ethnic groups are confronting one another, and the big problem that we have right now. This affects everyone in the same way, and we all are fighting against that problem. In a situation where ethnical issues and nationality issues don't affect directly our fight against the enemy, our fight against the foe.
そこが私たちが今一緒になって
And that's the point
大きな
where we are compelled and where we can do our own thinking in the field of culture. We can think about the meaning. What is it that we can contribute to the world? We can contribute to a new culture in the world. We have never thought about it before. In all the comments I've heard so far, I can say that your comments have been really very positive, and I'm one of those who think that we need to think positively. Beginning on the coronavirus, we cannot move from country to country, but that's an impediment for the time being. And at the time being, we got the opportunity to come closer to people in other places of the world. So that's interesting in its own right. We are introducing all the time ourselves to new people, and that is an opportunity in and of itself. And we could say that we have come closer to many new people because of this situation. Isn't that right? Isn't that so? And of course, how to implement the technologies that we are making use of today have become very essential. Technology has kept us connected. And in the end, of course, it's a matter of paying attention how human emotions move in these media. And it's a generator of big opportunities as well. Well, for the next year, BIENALSUR, I hope that many sectors, that many countries, that many regions, whether with Zoom, whether with an internet-based manner or otherwise, people will be able to connect.
みんながこの洞窟から出て
So that everyone, even when they remain at their own cave, they will have a window of opportunity to shed light to a new version of art. That's what I mean to say. So that a new expression of art can be born and a new role for society in art and culture can be given a space, a new space. Thank you. Thank you so much. And the last voice in this first round, Nada, from Tokyo to Texas, straight to Texas.
Thank you. Thank you and a warm greetings to all. I guess, yes, from Tokyo to Texas is a great example of what virtual meetings and technology can do for us. I'm very happy to be included in this discussion. Thank you, Diana and Annabelle, for making this possible. I want to actually sort of put in the point of view of an educator. as a professor at a university where when all of a sudden we were faced by the necessity to teach online, after half of the semester is over, we very much had to sort of stress test ideas that we had before, but didn't think, it was time for it. We were, of course, faced with challenges, logistics, accessibility. Are all the students able to even have Wi-Fi or have laptops? And the universities really stepped in to take care of many of these things to, help students figure out how to manage this situation. For me as a professor, it was rather interesting how I found different and new resources that my students can access here in Texas that they were not able to do before. Again, I joined the sort of, team of optimists, which is, everyone here around the table, to say that. So, for example, my students, I could send to go in person to museums in Dallas or Fort Worth, where I was able to send them virtually to go to museums around the world. Within the first couple of weeks, there were 250 museums that were able to share their collection virtually. And I was able to cut across a lot of red tape and get a lot of literature and publication available online. Now, we're still stress testing this situation since, in fact, as you all know from the news, Texas now has been in the red zone. So our cases are on the increase. And we're still in a, personal, by choice, lockdown. We are encouraged to stay at home, but I know definitely that I will be teaching remotely next semester. We made that decision early on, understanding that we're not going to be in a situation where we can do face-to-face, particularly for art history. There is more of a need for artists, for example, art students who need to access studios and equipment and be able to do face-to-face critique with their faculty. But as an art historian, I actually see this moment of a much needed slowdown, of focus on material. So for my own research, aside from the students, and I'm going to have to reconfigure all my courses for next semester for teaching remotely and face the challenges of how to keep students engaged and interested on a virtual platform versus the classroom, and hold discussions where it's possible, and large classes and Zoom meetings and availability of all this media becomes a different issue and a different challenge. This is more so, as a matter of fact, for education in the Arab world. Many of the universities just closed down as opposed to going virtual. And I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do when they restart. Now, this, to me, becomes an opportunity for further collaboration academically, where we can share resources with these other parts of the world who are not able to have these resources, because now, with copyright laws sort of becoming a little bit more flexible, we're able to digitize more and make it available, and possibly, should be find different ways to share these resources with colleagues in the Middle East. But again, as an art historian, I am now able to visit with artists for longer periods of time through Zoom, because their attention is not so much divided because of running around. Money, as you well know, many of the events, or rather all the events, got sort of postponed or canceled. So Art Dubai and the March meeting in Sharjah, for example, where I first met, as a matter of fact, Annabelle and Diana, was canceled or postponed to next year. So, this provides us a moment of reevaluating. This is something I heard from many of you as well, of reevaluating what is the global versus the local mean. The national identity that many of you refer to, possibly for the Arab world, would mean a focus on the local. Perhaps there has been a little bit too much rush for internationalization and the global meetings that sort of, seem to hop around the world. And maybe this is a moment of seeing what the local artists, particularly in the Arab world, but even here in Texas, can offer, and what are their concerns. And so, I can see this as a moment of re-understanding what the meaning of global versus local mean, something that we study a lot and approach in our scholarship. This, for example, Ernesto mentioned the Rizeli Art Initiative, which I'm happy to say I participated in one couple of weeks ago, that was organized by ITHRA in Saudi Arabia, where we had Arab artists included, artists from the different parts of the Arab world, who equally shared that this is a good moment of slowing down for them, that they are able to think more. Maybe they don't need to be in all of these events all the time. Maybe I don't need to be in person in all of these events all the time, because to be honest, I need time to write as an art historian, which was very much taken by all these sort of, very important activities, but perhaps, time consuming. Don't understand me wrong. I am having flashbacks to being on a plane, so I miss it. I'm having, travel withdrawals as well, and I look forward to that coming up. But perhaps we are able to slow down, so we are able to focus more on other aspects. Maybe, as museums now, and particularly in the Arab world, as a matter of fact, many of their collections have become virtual, available online, which is a good thing, because as also many of you mentioned, this is, or, I was just saying, this is a part for us to connect with other parts of the world that perhaps we were not connecting with. Maybe now, we're able to promote Arab art in a different way, that people are able to go into these museums and see it. So maybe these museums, instead of trying to arrange for, mega events, are able to focus their attention and their resources to more digitization, more making the virtual available, and more scholarship. I am hoping out of this pandemic and this sort of global crisis that we are going through, that there will also be an understanding that we need more resources to go towards scholarship, towards, we need to document the history of the past, the history of the moment. We need to be able to, particularly as a historian who works on Arab art, and I'm continuously documenting this, we need more resources to do so. I was sort of disheartened to hear Ernesto talk about an increase in trafficking and of stolen art, since I still continuously work on the idea of destruction of cultural heritage, and particularly the stolen collections from the Museum of National Art in Baghdad. So, I mean, their scholarship and the writing, in fact, would support our efforts to try to stop these trafficking of the art and the sort of, wider loss of the history and of the art itself. So I would say for a, well, of course, I cannot comment on any sort of governmental programs that are taking place, but I see the individual, the non-governmental, whether in the Arab world or even here in the US, are really stepping stepping forward and taking charge and doing what is necessary to increase the collaboration between us. I think this is the last thing I'd like to leave with. I'm conscious of time, and I'm hoping for a discussion and conversation, that what we need to do is find more ways to coordinate our events. Maybe the art world need to consolidate and coordinate the schedule, the calendar, and maybe academically we need to figure out a better way of coordinating and sharing the knowledge, as well as, find way to support artists within this crisis in producing new work. I am not sure that we need to necessarily reinvent culture. I think change is inevitable, and we have to always understand that change is going to happen. So, the fact that we are able to now, which the world resisted for so long, doing more virtual things than in person, are able to see the benefit of this. And maybe moving forward, while we will go back to doing things we used to do before, we will take more advantage of what technology allows us, and think about equity and accessibility in different ways. But I remain very optimistic and very hopeful that, you know, good things are going to happen. Thank you.
Gracias, Nada.
Sí, yo creo que de muy diversas formas, incluyendo la parábola tan poética de Vino sobre la caverna y la posibilidad de salir de la caverna con otro estilo, o lo que plantea Ernesto sobre la resiliencia.
Based on our style, or what Ernesto talked about resiliency, or based on what Rebecca said about the need for society to have a new appreciation of culture, so that governments have a different scheme in how they deal with cultural sectors, will put forward what we wanted to achieve with these panel sessions, discussing the new role of culture, discussing a different way of having culture and of making culture after the pandemics, because we talked a lot about museums, but for quite a long time already, we've been discussing about how museums went so touristic, and that's frivolization of the world of culture. And many of us taking part in this world, what is it that we want to achieve? And BIENALSUR is a leading example of this, is to try and see whether trying to be as massive as possible, I refer to museums and activities, when the time is right for that, can be handled from a different perspective, and whether we can discuss, for lack of a better term, they can rethink and no longer be that frivolous, for lack of a better term. And as Enrique said, it's a matter of organizing the system of art in a different way, so that this informality that is so ubiquitous, that implies such a weakness of creators and the world of art in general, can be rethought or solved in a different way. Along these lines, resiliency, so much alluded to by many of you, and the program of UNESCO in connection to that is so important. And the role of international agencies right now will be very important for all this. And I'd like to take advantage to let Ernesto know that we are working in close cooperation with UNESCO in Montevideo on a number of issues in connection to that. But I believe that all these leads us into thinking whether it is possible to rethink culture in a different way. I mean, because we run the risk of the pandemic being over and we'll be happy of having crowds of people in museums, to only realize that we lost a wonderful opportunity, because crisis will always bring an opportunity, and we missed out on that train, so to speak, to change fundamental values that we wanted to see happen. So I give the floor to Rebecca, who has to leave. She told us up front that she had to call it earlier, so she can make some closing comments on all this. Thank you so much, Annabelle. I apologize. I have to call it earlier. I have to leave you guys. The first thing I should say is that I've learned a great deal having listened to all of you, each and every one of you. I truly did. I should say three very quick things. First, I hope that this new appreciation of diversity, of what Carmen alluded to a while ago, will remain, given the trends that we've had so far, that we've seen happening in the last few times. I hope that the new appreciation of the local will happen within the framework of the universal values that we all share. Because the worst thing that could ever happen to us, if we would be part of a nationalistic movement that would be highly protectionistic, that would be of exclusion of others rather than of acceptance of diversity or acceptance of others, globally speaking as well, of course. So appreciating what's local should be within this framework of values. This is my own understanding of things. But of course, to give a word of caution wouldn't be unnecessary here. I mean, collaboration is important, and Nada alluded to that particularly. This should be our torch, our light, showing us the way to go. Collaboration of all of us. Second, I agree with what has been stated. Culture helps us think. Without ideas, there's no future that can be conceived. The Ibero-American space has precisely opened up the doors to reflection, to reflect on culture and sustainable development, so that we can lead things to a zenith, to where we are reflecting social transformation. Ibino talked about that, social transformation in all aspects conceivable. I wish we can keep being a space where we can keep thinking all together, where we can propose things together. I would like for us to say, or for me to say, that I also believe that the only constant of which I'm confident right now is that we will be set sailing in the world of uncertainty for a long, long time, and that the narratives that we can offer within the world of culture so that we can set sail successfully will be fundamental. I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. I'm an activist, I should say, meaning I think a lot of something that Shimon Peres would say. He would say that actually the pessimist and the optimist die, but we live in a different way. We all have our death assured, but that's what we have to do. We have to live in a different way, in doing, in action. Gramsci would say it in a different way. He said that we have to be pessimistic. I mean, live with the pessimism of intelligence and with the optimism of willingness, because reality has to be regarded such as it is. It is our willingness and our capacity to take action what makes us optimistic as a catalyst of transformation of our reality. And this is what we have to do today. We have to regard reality such as it is, but with willingness and action of optimism, because this can be transformative in and of itself. So I would like to say goodbye to all of you. Anibal and Diana, thank you so much. You've been wonderful hosts, and to all of you for your willingness and effort to carry forward the Bienal under this situation, which is what trickles down to each and every one of us. So thank you again. And I say bye. Unfortunately, I have to go to another Zoom meeting, but this one was very, very wonderful. It's been my pleasure to have joined you guys here. Can you please let me, thank you, Rebecca. I wanted to thank you, Rebecca, for your participation and for your stance, for sharing your stance, understanding the local and the cultural diversity. And I wanted to say that the summon I mentioned a while ago, this is part of who we are, art, culture, and heritage, with a hope, with national hope. We are looking for that. We cannot keep making decisions from the core of the country, nationally speaking, without thinking and without listening to the voices of the territory, diversity, how we were seeing through the crisis, and how we were imagining the future of the country and of culture. And this summoning, for the first time, we should say this, will reach 1,103 districts in our country and the 19 departments. We made this wonderful task so that no one will be left outside. And this will provide us great input so we can move forward to the new normal under these characteristics and specificities that diversity grants to each and every one of us in the municipalities, taking into consideration our populational aspect and our territorial aspect. So that we launched 8 days ago. It's been remarkable. And we have started more than 4,500 artists who are there by trying to use. This is a call out to that, getting together and showing what is actually happening and talking about self-care, responsibility, the relevance of following strict protocols for biosafety and security, now that we are reopening some activities, some economic activities in the country. This will be wonderful. We will be closing on July the 9th, and I cannot wait until we go to this point to talk about this narrative throughout and culture. Local, territorial is so important, thinking about the global culture. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Retomando tu comentario, Carmen.
Going back to your comment, Carmen, and to this comments, is important to see how the territory appeared in all presentations, whether libraries or bookstores. I mean, this is just one of the data. As Enrique alluded to, the meetings Virginia talked about, household actions, how we reconfigured the practice or the practices, something on which NADA focused on, and what you have just reinforced in your comment, Carmen, it is no different from the different actions on which we've been thinking in BIENALSUR. And there's an example we were discussing last time in Colombia. Juntos Aparte is the name, and this resurfaces. Along those lines, there is something in which we can keep moving forward based on these assumptions that we all converge on so wonderfully. And this is something that Ibino talked about when he said culture should produce an economy that will come from culture. I mean, I'm not sure whether he said so, meaning that, but I was writing something in connection to this yesterday, and I thought about it, maybe to move from cognitive capitalism to a social economy of knowledge that will come from the territory, from a variety of voices, I mean, from the bottom up, and so that from the cultural mesh, that economy will be generated. I don't know if you construed of his comments in the same way as I have. Who would like to take the leadership role here? If I'm allowed to, I would like to say that this is a very interesting path on the various experiences. Each and every one of us from our spaces, we have to go through the crisis in a different kind of way. I mean, in Latin America, we are seeing the crisis fully fledged. In the case of Asia or Europe, which is my case and that of Rebecca as well, we are seeing a situation where seemingly we go back to the new normal, and that has to be eradicated from the language. As a critique of art, I mean, normality was not that normal to begin with. So going back to normality, I mean, it didn't exist up front. We need to invent a different concept, and let's engage in this exercise sooner than later, I would say. So beginning on what Diana was saying, there is something that happened that has to do with the following, beyond art, I mean, and it has to do with personal and intercultural relations. It has to do with the fact that this period has given us time, as was stated already, has given us the time to reflect upon the position of a creator within a contemporary society such as the current one, from any different perspective. I'm not talking about any dimension of art specifically, but even when it comes to workers, what is the role of an artist in a society, especially in societies where this is not appreciated, not even economically? I'm talking about 6 or 7% of GDP being dropping, but these are figures that always are alluded to when we need to ensure that public policies are implemented. But deep down, when you take a look at a situation of crisis like the one we are having, you see that 90% of artists live in an overwhelming informality, and only 10% who do have security with their institutions being closed have to reinvent themselves to make ends meet, to make their job a feasible, viable one. So my reflection is, in the last few months, and of course, some months will continue for lockdowns. Uncertainty is so big. We don't know what will happen in the next 2 months. I listened to Argentina, to Chile and Colombia, and we are under the illusion that this will come to an end. But not even in Europe do we know. Some few days, some beaches were released, but they are already thinking about closing them again because there are new clusters that are opening up. So if the drug is not available and the cure or the vaccine is not available, we'll continue to be in a lockdown. So in this situation, what is the role of this creator that will continue under this uncertainty, whether in Lebanon, whether in Buenos Aires or in Tokyo? What is the role of that? How can they contribute beyond what they have already done? Because you may realize that the role of artists during that crisis has been such of protagonisms, such protagonistic that, I mean, doctors are saving lives, spirits and families. They are sparing people from getting divorced. They are saving the children that had to rethink about being educated from our houses. There were examples here. I mean, more than 30 to 40% of the entire notions that were taught around the world were around cultural processes, cultural sites, museums, literature, and whatnot. So we know about that, but we could keep discussing for thousands of years and we'll buy into that. But how do we go about managing so that in the divide that exists, in the gap that exists in our societies, the value gets properly recognized, not just from theory, but from finances. And this is the war we have to wage, because I had to reinvest on or revisit the policies that I got sent over by countries. And there is 30% of countries where funds assigned to culture were put available for healthcare, or 20% was delivered to education, where we do get to know the value, but it's not a financial or economic value. So we do have a problem here, because there were cities that could be in a lockdown for 8 months. How you will be killing the cultural diversity, you will devastating it. And that's very serious, because what we have managed to get in the last 40 to 50 years, since 82 on, is to ensure that diversity is essential for peace to be implemented in the global world. So it's not just whether we will open theaters to see whether there will be distancing or not. How do we keep up our cultural diversity situations, festivals and whatnot, not just in the hands of the private sector, but with a strong public investment that will ensure that in times of crisis, those spaces can keep delivering the knowledge that society so badly needs. Hence the challenge. That is where I find the challenge. That's so true. I see Enrique so active about that. Would you like to get back to him? I agree with Ernesto in connection to the challenges. These are in line with our agenda, with our future agenda. The idea of a public sector that will have a systemic lookout, not just taking care of the public cultural agenda, but to incorporate the independent culture as well, and the private cultural sector in all its variants, the community culture. In the scheduling I was mentioning in the public world initially, so it shouldn't be thought as a direct competition against what the rest of the culture will be doing, but as a complementary nature to it, opening up spaces, maybe not indoors, but in the open, or amphitheaters in parks, to make them available for private parties to be able to generate some sort of their activities of their own, We are speaking with librarians in the city to generate a network of mobile or moving libraries so that the public space gets activated where people will get together with culture. We definitely need to think outside of the box in an innovative manner, insisting on technology, because we might have extraordinary content, but what if we don't have the necessary driving force so that this culture gets to destination to talk to as many people as possible? Then we are faced in trouble. So with so much quarantine on our backs, what is happening is that creators no longer make file material available, but they are already starting to use technologies in an original manner. And this will survive, it will outlive the lockdown phase, and it will help us think about new hybrid ways of creation. All this, I believe, is part of what we have in our hands. And I will be closing on this. It's key to have a lot of space of conversation, close cooperation between states, both national and locals, to open up to these conversations so that there is disagreement in our conversations as well, and agreements as well, so that we can have a collective exchange. Because of course, if we think collectively, we will be having much of a wealth of notions than if we do individually. Thank you. What Ernesto said and the way in which he expressed it is interesting, because he has this vision that listens to artists and to cultural sectors. We have this outlook, we have the crisis, we have made progress in taking care of the crisis. We are thinking about reopening, we need to reactivate, and we know that this has to be done. But what's the point where the government or cultures will send out those messages to accompany and to support our cultural managers or cultural leaders? That's the point where we all need to focus our attention. And I believe that in our country, with our government, we need to understand that there is an important part that has to do with the responsibility on the part of the national, local, and regional governments. But we also insist on the fact that it is really important to look for the private sector to accompany us as well. We thought that cultural spaces, museums, and theaters should receive economic and financial support so that they work properly. We have just got resources to support museums, around 700 museums that we have in the country, in order to help them, especially in the reopening phase, so that they have the possibility to have protocols in place to secure the confidence of attending people, but also resources that will help them work as such, administration and security that is required by museums. And we also have opened up more robust callouts to people. Activists in cultural sectors should participate in different areas of cultures. We need to make them more rugged so that they get adjusted to the current times as well. And as Rebecca was saying, the summoning that has just been launched at 24 billion pesos, it should reach all areas of the country to recognize the cultural diversity and the relevance that we give to each and every one of the local municipalities, culturally speaking, and also in being able to have from them lots of input in order to project ourselves to what comes next in the post-pandemic. And this goes hand in hand with what we've been doing before the pandemic. We need to keep working in protecting and promoting, in safeguarding culture and heritage, memory, and opening up spaces and opportunities to creative industries and cultural industries. That's a second part. We need to speed up the entire process that we had before the pandemic in providing support and promotion to cultural industries in the culture. We are preparing the entire documentation that has been created by a different number of meetings we had in the country in the hand of universities. All this input what we have gathered from the experiences we've had in the last 3 months, so that 7 ministries, the Labor Ministry, the Trade and Tourism Ministry, uh, the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Communications and ICTs, Information and Technology and Communications, so that in the National Council of Economy, we should study how we have been faring before the pandemic and what is it that we came against in the middle of the pandemic, what difficulties, what opportunities was it that pandemic showed us in order to improve on that strategy where we got together with those industries. Something that is really important will come out from that, because at the core of that, we will find what needs to be done, the support and the strategy that is necessary, cultural creative industries in its entire value chain. This is what has been a decision, quite a major decision, after listening to the outlook that the crisis has shown us. And I also think, and this is really important, it's been stated by all of you, is this permanent articulation between government and civil society. There's a lot that can be contributed to the discussion, but that can be contributed to the new outlook that we should have of what culture should be all about and what the arts are all about for societies. Because we cannot, and I repeat myself, based on what I said initially, any reactivation that can be thought of in countries necessarily has to take into consideration the culture of arts as a cornerstone and as a driving force of this reactivation. Thank you, Carmen. We need to wrap up because, I mean, these conversations are such a wealth of content that could as well keep going for forever, but we all have to go back to what continues in our own lives on this Saturday. So I'd like to give the floor for the last chance if anyone wishes to take the floor again, or else I give the floor to Annabel. But before, I'd like to thank you all for your listening willingness and for your contributions. And no doubt we remain open to keep going in discussions in the future. Ibino had a comment. I would like to make a comment, if I'm allowed to. In connection to the local side of things, when we think about what culture is all about, and there's always been this kind of regionalization, the region of Europe, the region of Africa, the region of Asia, everything has been kind of regionalized, right? So the same has been true in our understanding that we have to transcend those limitations within those ideas of the regions, Asia, Africa. There was a lot of internal diversity. The same applies in Japan. In Japan, there's a lot of regional diversity, north and south, so to speak. And it's been quite difficult for us to understand that. And lately, so we have been thinking about developing individual regions and individual cultures. We need to think that culture is brought about based on differentiation of the regions. We've seen how specific art can be when it comes to regions. So if each and every one of us
アートの特
Being
性
artists can show the diversity in us, and this is the specificity of art, generating a diverse number of perspectives. So at the point of understanding the vision and the point of view of each and every one of us is where the role of art is particularly strong and important. And my opinion is that this is how a different economy can be born, based on this concept. When we can have an honest and true acceptance of diversity, that is where economic exchange that has appreciation of a diversity can truly be born. Diana, will you allow me? What the role is, the regional role. We need to make an effort to generate spaces and conditions so that creators can keep creating. So we have a role to play. Governments have a role to play. We have looked for summonings or callouts that will aim at that, providing resources for creation and production, as we can have access to cultural spaces with crowds of people. As that happens, the reopening of theaters has not been that wide so far. We will be opening theaters behind closed doors, no matter how awful it sounds, but so that inside those doors, cultural players, artists can create and produce, so as to have, well, of course, imagination and expression can have a space where to prosper, and so that we have sufficient creations so that we are ready for when the right time comes for people to visit those spaces. It's important for them to have those spaces, to keep allowing them to have a space of creation and for them to keep producing. Thank you. Thank you, Carmen. Well, before anything else, I'd like to make an announcement to Enrique. Now that so many shops are closing their doors and so many libraries are closing their doors, I should say that this university that consists of lots of people who have action with what Rebecca mentioned, knowing pessimism of what is happening in society, but also being optimistic enough so you can keep moving forward. We will be opening in the next few days, or as soon as our pandemic will stop. We are finalizing the errands, the proceedings to open up a new library. So that's major news. So in connection to what has been considered here, we believe that we should be fully aware of the fact that we are Latin American, except for NADA and for Ibino. Excepting them, they are in eras, especially in the Middle East, they're having problems similar to the ones in our region. But why do we say that we have to be fully aware of the fact that we are Latin American? Because Latin America is the more unequal area of the world. And it is the area where the social problems we were referring to, on the lack of respect for diversity and the lack of regard for minorities, especially in some countries, some big countries of Latin America, is happening far more deeply than before. So it is truly important to take into consideration those regionalisms that we are living through, but we should do so with Hibino's criterion, how from a regional point we can reach to the mix that enables a general culture. So I was saying before, and this is a term on which I'll insist a lot, the frivolization of culture. Frivolization of culture that happened generally in Europe, or mainly in Europe, with the zenith of a culture mixed to luxury or mixed to the billionaires in the world, even though it originated in the United States and in Europe. That's truly negative. It is far more negative if we continue to leave this privilegization to dominate us in Latin America. This is why we need to think about that, where we insist a lot from BIENALSUR, a culture with commitment. And when we talk about culture with commitment, we don't talk about a partisan type of culture to sustain a political ideology. That's not the case at all. Here we mix the regional and the international notions. Culture can bring forward processes such as the one in Cucuta with Carmen's cooperation, or with Diana's a comment because she took part in an event 3 or 4 days ago where we had people from the ministry in Colombia, and I listened to that, and that was really very interesting. Or projects that are not created in Latin America, such as CAN project by Ibino. They were quite successfully applied from all points of view, from a social point of view and from the point of view of defending diversity in the projects that Ibino did together with us in Buenos Aires with children with special skills, and also in Peru, and the ones we are planning to have next year. I believe that we are faced with a challenge, and as was stated here, it is far more difficult than we can ever imagine. And I'll repeat my notions before. Crisis will always mean an opportunity to come out of it in a better standing. It's a possibility where we should not miss out on this opportunity, and we should try to replenish a cultural world that may be kind of gray because of the pandemic, but it should be reestablished on new basis that will mean something on which we always insist as well, which is defending diversity and defending the right of culture for all human beings who believe that this is not actually the case so far today. I thank you so much for the time you devoted. We are fully aware of the fact that you had to um, accommodate your tight agendas to this event, or in the case of Ibino, who is in his on a on a strange type of hour for him, because it's 2 a.m. in the morning for him, or when he would travel to Argentina after so many long hours of flight, or to Nara, for whom we have special devotion and appreciation, and to Carmen, a young but old colleague in BIENALSUR. Diana will get back to you to see whether you like this for your museums in San Juan. I'm talking about Virginia, sorry. To Enrique, who's always joined us. To Ernesto, who's even when he's based in Paris, he's a Latin American person by right and by adoption, and by the willingness of being Latin American. And he has a very important role to play, because UNESCO has a very important role to play when it comes to all of this. And to our Minister of Culture in Colombia, with whom we hope we can keep doing lots of things. And to thank you, Diana. I was talking on your behalf, and now I talk on my own behalf. I thank you for the brilliant hosting. I'd like to thank all translators. This was a special challenge in the case of Achilles. He translated into Japanese, the translator of English, and our sign translators, the performers who are joining us in every meeting. Thank you all. Thank you so much. And we
create a community of the photographers here that will give into the children the various vision of the photography.
Lo bonito del proceso es ver cómo cada artista va generando sus ideas.
La idea de instalar un seguidor que señala a todos desde arriba es esta idea de quién fue.
Siempre utilicé mi experiencia cotidiana más que la historia del arte para construir mi trabajo.
D'avoir peur de disparaître, c'est le début de la vie en même temps. Parce que disparaître, c'est aussi naître.
Como artista, estamos voltados de reflectir problemas.
La construction misma del tiempo es una ficción.
Je cherche à installer de grandes trompettes qui, quand il y a du vent, représentent un peu le cri de la baleine.
それを受け入れる人の関係性ができたときにアートっていうのは成り立つのかなとは思うので。
La magia no aparece en cualquier momento. La magia llega si la sabes esperar. Y yo espero, como un cazador, a que eso suceda.
Art is part of the life.